Hi everyone, welcome to the Shape of Work HR Playbook 3.0. Super glad to have you here and glad to see the numbers rise so fast. I hope some of you have been to the welcome video in case this is your first time. But even if it's not, you can always get accustomed to the platform at your own time. I'm Shambhavi Sharma. Hi, if you've seen me before, double hi if you've seen me for the first time. Let's get the session started by warming up the chat first. Also, let me know if you can hear me well, if you can see me well, and I am going to just give a hi in the chat. I'm Shambhavi. I am from Springworks and the Shape of Work community, and I am based out of Goa, and I'd love to know where the rest of you are from, where you're joining us from, what is your role, what do you do. Okay, now we have people from Pune. Hi Pooja, we have Bhash from Bangalore, Delhi. Lots of people from Pune. Hi, Mahindra and Ashok from Mumbai. Great. I'm glad to see the chat is already buzzing, and our goal is to just keep this up across the day and across the sessions. And I'm going to just start by talking about TSOW. For those of you, very quick one line about TSOW, because I'm assuming a lot of you are already familiar with our 23,000 plus community. If you're not, make sure to join it so that you get your certificates. Everything else about the Shape of Work, you learn as you join the community and you learn across it. So we don't need to spend more time on that. I'm just going to put the link in the chat box, and I'll be doing that again and again. Now on to the first session of the day, which is a really interesting conversation on something called Let the Org Chart Burn. I'm sure you can imagine what that's going to be about a bit. And our panelists are going to be reimagining HR structures for speed, for autonomy, and chaos. So let's get to know the panel, and you'll be seeing them on the stage one by one. First up, we have Sneha Arora. Sneha has led HR at some of India's most fast-paced companies, from Myntra to Flipkart to Simple. She is not a stranger to chaos, to scale. She's known for breaking down some legacy structures and building organizations that move fast without losing people. As you can imagine, as you can see, Sneha is a great choice for today. So welcome, Sneha. I'm glad to have you here. Joining her on the panel is Hanideep Singh Sabharwal, or HD, as many of us know him. He brings a unique mix of a startup scrappiness and enterprise depth. He's global HR head at Pando and has built people systems that actually keep up with business change. And he's all about challenging traditional structures, empowering teams. We've had him once before on a really successful TSOW webinar. He was an instant hit. So welcome, Hanideep. Very glad to have you with us. Our third panelist brings tech and systems lens to organizational design, and that is Surya Srinivas. He's the VP of Engineering and Product at greytHR. He has led teams from 60 to 60,000 people, and he treats organizations like living, breathing systems, using architecture, data, product thinking to design structures that he's able to scale without them falling apart. So once again, just the right person for the panel. Welcome, Surya. Great to have you here. And last but not the least, I'm going to introduce our moderator for the day, Satish, before I hand it over to him. Satish is the Chief People Officer at ACO. He's also the co-founder of Spotable. Satish has lived at the intersection of talent, product, and hyper growth, and he's never been afraid to ask why are we still doing things this way. Not just that, Satish is one of our favorite moderators. We've witnessed him facilitate many amazing conversations, and we're so glad that he was up for doing this with us. So welcome, Satish, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Shambhavi. I think you already put enough and more pressure on me by saying, so it's always fun back here and talking to a bunch of colleagues from the ecosystem, and this is one of my favorite topic too. The reason I jumped in to say that, hey, I would love to do this when this came up from Shape of Work is this is also something that we are trying to do at ACO. So I have a selfish interest to learn from all of you, HD, Sneha, and Surya, and So really looking forward to hear from your experience. I think from an audience point, I can't say enough about the relevance of this topic in the current world where technology disruptions are happening, business, and every day there are market dynamics that keep influencing businesses. Our traditional ways of structuring businesses is not anymore going to work, right? So you all know what I'm talking about. Like, we've all been in the place where the beautifully aligned box that make everything look neat, but when it comes to really the work to happen, org structures doesn't necessarily enable that, right? I think we've been there. There are moments that maybe there are three people doing the same job, but none of them knows that who's accountable for what part of the work, right? Or being seen in the decks of long decks of 50 slides where reorgs are announced. Maybe our interest stops at probably seeing the seventh and eighth slide, right? So um, I think the question probably to ask the panel would be, hey, what if org structures isn't it scary one? Can we actually do org structures in a way that we design products, which is more iterative in nature, bring that design thinking, and is there a way that we make it far more humane in nature? That's something that I would love to hear from my panelists, right? So with that note, I'll get to the first question. Sneha, this is for you. You've been in through rapid scale. I think we've been colleagues also in our journey at Flipkart. We have seen enough and more of this, rapid scale pivots of orgs going into GM structures, pod structures, functional structures, right? What are the earliest signals that your org's, structure is probably holding you back, where cracks are usually formed? What are the early indicators? How do you actually know, hey, this isn't working? There's probably a better way to do this.
Hi Satish, hi everyone. Hi to my hello to my co-panelists today as well. Again, very interesting topic and very interesting question as well, Satish. So let me jump right into what you asked me. The cracks almost always show up in human friction before they show up in a structure. Especially in high growth environment, structure doesn't fail with a bang. It's usually those quiet signals where people start experiencing friction in their day-to-day work. Collaboration starts to feel like negotiation, and you'll hear people saying we are waiting on them, or that's not a problem. So which starts to signal that accountability is, while it's vertical, but work is flowing horizontally through other teams. And one of the other signs is where you see decision velocity slow down. Things start getting escalated. It becomes the norm. And when work is happening differently than the org chart, you also see people step out and take ownership outside of their functions, because the formal structure is not really supporting how work is being done. And these are the places where you see some of these cracks, some of these sentences being spoken, some of these things getting dropped, lagging behind. Those are
Yeah.
some of the early signs.
Yeah, I think follow up to a question. I think to make this is a very serious topic, right? Let's also make it a bit lighter, right? So, what are those moments in whether it's whichever employer? Let's not name them, right? What's been that moments that you probably as a practitioner really laughed at it, or the funny moments, interesting moments rather, right? When you realize that org chart needed to be rethought, right? That's one part, and what helped you act on it? Two parts of the question. Yeah.
Yeah, so with one of my employers, we started witnessing teams were really up against each other. The business team would ask something, and engineering team, people won't listen, or things would take time, and it got to a point wherein it was getting into shouting matches as well. That these guys are not doing it, and we can't deliver, and all of that. And the fundamental problem when we double clicked and we heard people out was really that we had formed two product lines, and while we retained the functional structure, so engineering was engineering, but business and product teams obviously wanted to move faster. They wanted to experiment, while the engineering team wanted to stabilize, and they wanted to scale with that stability as well. And that's what we realized is causing
Yeah.
this friction where they're pitted against each other. So that forced us to act in terms of changing a structure to reflect what we were trying to do, which is we structured it according to business line. We made pods so that the whole pod had the full accountability. And we saw the friction not just reduce, we saw them being able to move faster. We also saw a cultural shift where, there was this pride in doing things together, pride in what they were delivering. And the culture changed to that of ownership, that, we will make this product successful, than saying, that person is not doing their job and they need more people and whatever it was, right? So I think just closing this out, I think structure isn't about who reports to whom. Satish, what you mentioned, it's not about
Yeah.
those neat boxes,
Yeah.
right? It's eventually about trust and decisions flow. When that starts breaking down, then you know that it's time to rethink and this is not
Absolutely.
working.
Yeah, I think like can't fully agree with what you especially on culture, but I'll come back to you. I have some questions on that, but I think I'll go to HD and Surya and come back to you on that part of the question, right? HD, I think I'm moving to you. You worked across legacy firm and disruptors, right? And what's that one org design idea that sounds great but actually slows things down?
Thank you so much, Satish, for the question. Guys, happy to be here. Couple of them actually, Satish. I was thinking about this question. Uh, One is span of control. I think there is enough research around this much should be a span of control, this
Yeah.
much should not be. I've seen people doing a lot less and a lot more in terms of span of control and still doing decently well or not. I think that's one. Second, cross-functional teams, I would say, which is like from siloed work to cross-functional teams, how legacy would now work, and we've tried that in our companies, the startups as well. Where I'll give an example of, let's say, a GTM or a go-to-market organization where there's a sales team, there's a pre-sales team, there's a product team, a delivery team, so on and so forth. We assume that okay, sales will do sales job, pre-sales will do
Yeah.
pre-sales job, and eventually it will flow into the outcome, right? But our experience has been different, where uh, rather than aligning, especially in startup or high growth organization, I'm specifically calling out, rather than having structure, functional structure define the outcome, let
Mhm.
the outcome define the work what we
Okay.
do. The example we have, for example, in our kind of a Pando organization would be when we have a large client as a prospect, let's say in US, and there are sales, there's pre-sale, there's product, there's
Mhm.
engineering. When we put a goal at the end and then we align people based on that goal versus I'm supposed to do sales or pre-sales
Yeah.
job, which might work in some other context, but not probably in a high growth startup environment, had gone well with us. Obviously, that comes with its own set of negatives as well. The
Yeah.
more you loosen the strings on the org structure, it leads to a bit more work to make sure everybody is pulling in the right direction, in the same direction.
Yeah.
But I think that's a cost worth paying to have not only in high growth setup, not only cross-functional teams do project-based work, but actually have an outcome aligned, and then forget about the team structure for that matter, and just whatever you can do to make the outcome
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, I think to kind of summarize what you're saying, it's more about saying let objectives bring people together versus structures, right? Let's have broad outcomes defined for the pods or structures they belong to. That should bring them together. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, but where do you see this? The structures fail first. Is it in the process? Is it people, or is it priorities? And why?
Uh, I think first maybe process, but to be honest, I think the most important one would be people. And I'll give an
Mhm.
example here, without naming anybody, obviously, right? But we
Yeah,
had a structure for partnerships in our organization, which means that I have to get demand generation from our
Mhm.
system integrated partners or supply chain consulting partners who will doing transformation projects for their clients.
yeah,
They come and have a prospect for me to pitch, let's say, logistics technology, what Pando does, right? We had a brilliant individual actually who could do pretty much the whole thing from prospecting to a partner to negotiating and handling a deal to actually
yeah,
contracting. The individual could do everything. But a structure, and this is I think 5-year old, 4-year old story. A structure didn't allow that. A structure allowed partnership to hand over the prospect to a sales organization. Uh, and we were rigid then. Eventually, that individual left, and to be honest, the individual was doing really well in their career. Uh,
Mhm.
and Pando struggled for a bit for the partnerships angle to kind of kick through. Now we're on the other side of the story where we are expecting our partnership engine to own the whole thing, and I think there's some way to go. So, important one rather than the first one would be people impact based on rigid org structures lead to significant down outcomes for an organization.
Cool. Thanks, HT, for that. I think we'll come back. I'll go to Surya, and I mean, Surya, I think question to you, like you've been led both engineering and product teams through scale, and I'm sure that scale would have also resulted in reorg, shifting priorities. How do you design org structures that can absorb change without, I mean, burning people, maybe reducing the burn of people in the process of it, right? And I'm glad to have you here. I think we are three of us from a people practice side, and we probably will learn from you on how you handled it. Yeah, the other side.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Satish. Hello to the panelists and good afternoon to all the audience. I think irrespective of the tech side or business side or people side, leadership is end of the day to do everything with people.
Absolutely.
So burnout, right? In my experience, I think burnout happens mainly for two reasons. One, due to the lack of psychological safety, and second, due to the lack of clarity with respect to the vision or strategy, right? So in either cases, or sometimes if both the cases, the burnout happens. Ideally, vision shouldn't change. Priorities can definitely change because the market is dynamic, the customers, the business, everything is dynamic. So priorities move up and down. Obviously, to absorb change, building psychological safety and having clarity on the vision is extremely important. Of course, all this is easier said than done. I think one way to actually absorb changes is to have a failure budget, right? And it's a budget not necessarily with the money, but with respect to time. Say, for example, you work in sprints or Kanban or whichever process, right? In a month, how much time can you afford to fail fast when you experiment, right? So that psychological safety is automatically built into it because there is a failure budget. Second thing, of course, the retros have to happen more frequently. Typically, retros only glorify things, but we should enable the team members to be more honest and ensure that it doesn't lead to retaliation. I think that's the second thing. And third thing that I observed most is we should be more outcome based than output based in all our conversations. Most often, what happens is, okay, I got a task, I finished the task, so it's completed, right? But what's the business outcome? What's the actual change that happened in the system? We don't talk about it. We are
Yeah.
more focused in delivering things than actually seeing the change. So I think transparency, bringing in a lot of transparency reduces anxiety and improves trust, and thereby, I think the change can be absorbed without burning out.
Okay, thanks, Surya. I think especially managing change, I think communication plays a very important role in terms of any structural change that bring, whether you move from functional to pod to functional, whichever, right? I think yeah, very important point that you touched upon. I think there is a request from generally audience to be, and they're not able to hear you. If you can be a little bit more louder, Surya.
Sure.
So follow up to that, right? As I mean, I'm also leveraging, since you come from a background of product tech, and you've seen product architecture or product buildings typically go through sprints, pivots, scale to different, especially methodologies like sprint, and even when you go on a PMF to everything, typically products journeys are patience, right? You're iterative, you kind of go through that process, right? How do you think something like that can be applied to org design? And so structures evolve, learn from experiments. Like, do you think there is a method to doing like that in parallels? Can you think something on that line?
Absolutely. I think one of the key things that we can learn from product releases is the beta programs that we do with our customers, right?
Yeah.
So we know we developed a new feature and we wanted to ensure that we'll not roll it out to all the customers, but a bunch of selected customers, see, learn, and then, evolve to all the customers. I think same can happen internally with the teams, right? Say, for example, whenever I believe whether it's an HR leader or a business leader or a tech leader, one of the most toughest challenges is the change management, right?
Yeah.
And when, let's say, for example, I'm introducing a new tool or a new tech or some new process, right? Going big bang to all the teams and saying, hey, this is the thing you have to use, human reluctance comes into play and a lot of friction happens. Rather pick a bunch of, small pods or squads or teams or, enthusiastic people in the top 20%, experiment with them, learn, and then show them as the role model for rest of the teams. Then most of the times we have succeeded with that, where the human reluctance doesn't really play well. People kind of see, okay, it's proven, so maybe we can also do that.
Yeah.
And of course, this happens with a lot of sharing, learning, upskilling, reflection,
Yeah.
and how people can work together. So I think that is one thing which can definitely work for most of the teams.
Yeah, I think very, very interesting point, Surya. I think that generally appetite for people organizations also to have that, hey, this isn't a checklist. Let me try experiment. Let me see if this works. I think I'm a big fan of that whole product thinking bringing into people function. I think uh, iterative in approach, experiment in small cohorts. Like in market, we go in, percentage of customer would be first tested before you go into a larger audience. I think a lot of that absolutely can be learned by people function in many things that we do, so that it doesn't become yet another checklist of actions to be done. I think there is so much to be learned from product organization. There is so much to be learned in people function. Yeah, thank you. So I'll come back to you, Sneha. I think from where we left, I think you touched upon the point about culture and how culture plays a role in terms of culture plays a role in terms of bringing design efficiencies and bringing structural efficiencies. Not just about rolling out. There is a nuance of ownership. There's a nuance of collaboration, communication. All that play a role, right? Like what's your view, right? How does this two go well, right? Org designs and culture, and like what takes priority? How do you build when, if you're a people lead of company, how do you think about building?
So I think traditionally we have thought of structures as hierarchy, and where does decision actually happen, who takes accountability. I think the real org is never what you see on an org chart. Because it's sometimes what people rely on when they need to do something. So, for example, who would you call at 9 p.m. to get something unlocked? Right? It's that trust, the influence, the decision making that forms when formal structure it doesn't keep pace, especially with the pace of change, right? I think, especially in high growth setups, we learned very quickly that drawing a chart, etc., is not the solution.
Yeah.
Where shadow structures always exist in every organization, right? Where actually the work is happening and cross-functional groups were actually getting together and solving problems. So instead of fighting that, right, we decided to formalize it. Yeah. So the earlier example I shared, where we were operating across two product lines, where we were still structured as functions, and that's what was leading to friction. So we instead of doing an us versus them thing and putting something in the box, we moved to a model which actually enabled that, right? So I think putting structures requires not just an understanding of spans and the principles of structure these days, but I think it requires a very good pulse into your own organization and how actually work is getting done, how decisions are being made, and what are some of these shadow structures which are actually enabling work to get done. When you have a good pulse of that, you design with that for your organization, and not copy paste, or take it from a textbook, or the company XYZ does it that way, and so it should work for us. The culture part of it is very important because it is ultimately about how work is getting done in your particular context.
And then, what's your views on shadow structure? I think in startups and high growth, I think there is also confusion about shadow structures being the power centers of organization. I think there is also pros and cons to that. More cons than pros to the cultural nuances, right?
There is.
What's the balancing art of it? Like, I think that's one of the things that I often come across as challenges for practitioners in people side, right?
Right, Satish. So, I think I'll respond to this with two hats, right? And as an HR leader who also works with other leader who sometimes run into these issues, right? I mean, all of us have seen those issues as well. Where there are outsiders and there are insiders and all of that, right? I think when I've coached leaders that I've worked with in the organization that I've been with in through these experiences. I've always almost coached them to be able to leverage that influence network well, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't fight the power centers, you can't fight the structures which exist. I think it's a question of how do you effectively leverage those networks to drive what you need to drive and deliver the outcomes that you need to deliver. So that's my response as a coach to the leaders that I work with who run into these situations. I think as an HR leader, like what I was mentioning earlier, that get a pulse of, if you're not plugged into what are the shadow networks or decision making, how it works in your organization, I think you're missing a big piece of a big piece of information which can help you design a structure, or which can help you work with others, and which can help you coach your leaders as well. So wherever you can bring that into formalizing it, you bring that in. Wherever you can't, you at least coach and you work with your leaders and teams to be able to deliver outcomes with the shadow structures that exist as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Neha. I'll move to HP. HP, when org structures loosen, right, decision making can actually speed up, but also spiral at the same time, right? What you learned about designing distributed authority without losing control, right? And especially in high growth or early stages, that losing control is always a fear. People at top, right? I mean, there are certain things they wanted to control. There are, like, I've heard founders talk to me about saying, hey, Satish, we would want to keep one or two parameters. The gate has to be on very tall on decision making, but I'm okay on other parameters to be letting people decide, right? Like, what's your learning? How did you go about doing it? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Thanks. It's a great question, Satish. I think I will build on what you just said, and I agree with you. Um, a few things, but I think two things which stand out for me, which are simple but not very obvious, and then a couple of other points as well. One is what you just said, which is right. I think when you are more loosely aligned as an org, because there's more autonomy, more freedom, more flexibility, so on and so forth, and in a smaller organization, probably can afford that as well. Having our decision making principles aligned upfront is one of the important factors, if you ask me, because in a high growth state, you'll potentially can do 10 things, but you'll probably do two only and ignore the eight. But which two to act on and which to ignore, the majority which to ignore, is the whole game, right? I think clarifying what is important, how do we make a decision, what to act on, what to not. Our principle aligning upfront is, I think, extremely helpful. Second, again, a very obvious, simple point, but right people for the job as well, Satish, right? I think I am of the opinion that while all of us have learning ability, all of us would adapt to any environment. There is a certain style people thrive in as well. So I think it will be good to find people who are, if not only okay with, let's say, a bit of chaos, but potentially thrive in chaos as well. Who like fluidity, who are not too worried. I think one of the big learnings we've had when we've hired people from across the other organization, especially when larger organization person comes join a small organization, the lack of structure and the lack of clarity sometimes daunting to, hey, where do I even start? It's a jungle and I was just thrown into it. How do I find my way? So I think those two things, a simpler, more direct action items as well. I think having the right goals in place and the right incentives in place helps as well. So they were more obvious ones. If you simply put, if you want me to do something, you pay me for that as well. And I think that rule certainly stands, as well as give me objective.
But at the same time, right? In the new world where cross-functional teams and pods really drive outcomes versus a traditional functional structures. I think one of the challenges, even as a practitioner, for me has been about how do you signal ownership and accountability, right? And I think one of the methods that we've been using is about using truly OKR as a or driving pods driven the objective and key results for the pod, and then taking accountability and all that. How do you signal this, and what's been your learning?
Okay, again, an important question. I agree with you, Sadiq. We also struggle with that on a daily basis. But again, when I mentioned goals, OKRs clearly defined. I'm defined on the outcome, not on the output or on the input for that matter. All that things in all the basics, let's say, building blocks in place. Even then, when you don't have enough governance of an org structure, an org structure leads to a lot of governance, which is helpful as well. But when you don't have that, it can lead to misaligned accountability, so on and so forth, right? After having the basics in place of building blocks, having the right OKR, goal structure, etc., in place, have the right people, right goals, etc., I think with the advent of AI and with the heavy automation which is happening in our work, right? I think the flip side is what is working for us, which is having honest conversation. I think the more AI is getting into our work, more human interventions are valuable versus anything which an AI can throw out, right? So I think honest conversations with people when the building blocks are in place, but are still not getting the right accountability of the outcomes. Having clear, honest conversation, I think it's helped us.
I think brilliant point, HT. Thanks for sharing that. I think in the world of AI, I think people often go so much in automations to all that. I think org designs are about impacting people, and I think doing that with personal touch, and we realizing that it's about end of the day the people involved in it. I think brilliant point. Okay, thanks, HT. I'll move to Surya. I'll come back, HT. Surya, I think one of the things that I learned is you applied Conway's law of team structures. I think for the larger audience to know, if you're not familiar with the term, it's about the way your teams are organized, shapes the way your product, services, and systems are built. Surya, I'm assuming I've kind of done some bit of justice of explaining this, right? So can you break that down and share how aligning structures and org design improved collaboration in a method like that? Yeah. Maybe you can speak about that piece, because not everybody would be familiar about. I know it's a fairly old, philosophy, and if you can give 1 minute brief about it and get an explaining would be useful. Yeah.
Absolutely. Am I audible? Because once in a while I see
It's
comments.
better now. Yeah.
Okay. So see, to oversimplify Conway's law, it says the design or an architecture that is produced by a team mimics the org structure or the communication structure of the team, right? So that's what Conway's law actually talks about. Essentially, in my experience, when we say cross-functional team, first of all, we need to understand what are different functions. Say, for example, when it comes to product or engineering, you have different product managers, designers, developers, QA, DevOps, product marketing, and the number of functions keep growing depending on whether you are a small startup or a big enterprise. But we kind of create boundaries to nurture excellence. Say, for example, you say this is a development team, or this is a testing team, or this is a product management team. We create a boundary to nurture excellence so that that particular function follows certain governance and best practices, so on and so forth. But when we have to work together as a team, it's always cross-functional. In a particular pod or a squad, you have a product manager, a designer, a couple of developers, a couple of QA, right? So typically what happens is the boundaries that we draw actually become borders that actually divide team members, because developers keep saying that, okay, QA didn't test this, and QA says there are too many defects, and a lot of times a lot of finger pointing keeps happening between these functions. Essentially also because the way in which we are conditioned, because when during the education we were always told to be the Usain Bolt, like run fast and win, right? But once we join the corporate, we are always asked to be a Messi or a Ronaldo, where you pass to hit the goal or reach the goal. How much ever fast an Usain Bolt can run on football ground, I don't think he can ever score a goal. So I think that's where shared purpose and clarity are extremely important. We have to over communicate on the shared purpose and clarity, because teams are no more co-located. We have hybrid teams, remote teams, geographically scattered teams working in different time zones and are in cross-functional nature. So when it comes to specifically Conway's law, how to organize, there is no one size fits all. We have to look at what functions are shared and what functions are not shared. Say, for example, there can be certain teams where you have product managers, designers, developers, and QA working together. And a DevOps could be a shared team. A product marketing or a content management team could be a shared team, right? But there could be certain teams where product managers and developers are in a team, but a QA could be a shared team across these different teams. So depending on the type of the use case, we can actually organize the teams in terms of what function can be shared across different teams and what cannot be shared and has to be exclusive to a particular team.
Got it.
So that's how we can,
very helpful, Surya. I think, I'm hoping that the audience would also benefit with what you explained. you also worked with fairly large organizations, were 50,000 plus people. You also worked in organizations of 500, 600 people, right? So just in a short summary, if you can say, is there a myth about maturity of org designs because companies are bigger versus smaller? Does leadership think maturity happens at certain phase, or like, is there a myth? Or,
I think yes. Uh, Once upon a time, it was true, but I don't think it's no more. One of the myths that I continuously come across is large orgs have a lot of bureaucracy and process, whereas smaller startups are more agile. I don't think it's necessarily true, because it all depends on the autonomy and drive, right? Even in large organizations, there can be smaller parts which are more autonomous and can have a drive. So as I said earlier, if we start talking about shared purpose and be clear in our communications, I think teams will self-organize themselves. It doesn't matter whether it's a 600 man or 60,000 man organization.
cool. Got it. Okay. Thanks, Surya. I'll move to the next phase. Sneha, I'll come back to you on. It's more about if you are to reimagine org strategies, right? What are we replacing them with? Let's get into that part, right? So you've spoken about first principle thinking. You have to build new org from scratch in a I remember in our offline conversation talking about remote first company, high growth company, and today, what would be, I mean, learning from what you have done, and if you are to look forward to do something, right? What are core principle would you apply in terms of, putting a org structure, let's say for a remote or a hybrid organization spread across multiple geography to all of that complexity exists? What will be some of the principles, core principles that would you apply?
This sounds fun. So let me. So I think if I had to really start from scratch, right, especially in a remote first, high growth sort of a setup, Satish, I think the central principle that I'll design around is that decisions should live closest to the customers, right, and not highest on the org chart. Because the further the decision making is from customer problems, the slower you move and the more diluted accountability becomes. Right. So instead of building upwards, layers of management, dotted lines, approvals, all of that, I'd build outwards, small, empowered, outcome led squads, which are closest to the problem and trusted to solve it. So I think one move from the whole function based approach to mission based approach, right? Normally when we design saying I'll set up a growth team, I'll set up a engineering team. Instead design with mission in mind, saying that look, I want to reduce my onboarding drop offs, or I want to increase repeat transactions, right? And then give the capabilities to each of these pods, so that they're accountable for a very clear and measurable outcome, right? And you don't need a central layer of decision makers if the teams have clarity, context, and trust built into these squads, right? Second, I think designing for remote, the biggest thing which matters is context and not control, right? Remote first just doesn't mean that people are in different places, right? It means that context becomes your infrastructure. If context is missing, decisions slow down or they tend to just go sideways, right? So design around rituals and tools that replace that physical proximity. So for example, is there robust documentation, not just dumps of document, but decision histories, working agreements, charters? What are some of the decision making protocols, not in terms of who signs off, but how do we actually decide something, right? Check-ins, what is the way to do structured check-ins, and what are the spaces for human connection? Because remote or not, psychological safety still is the bedrock of teams which can move fast and which are creative.
Yeah.
And the third piece being, Satish, that psychological safety trumps reporting lines,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you can design the most beautiful structure, but if the reporting lines are the organizing principle, then it doesn't really allow you to move fast, take the decision. So instead of asking who approves this, I want people to ask what's the customer need and do I have the context to act, right? So the shift of permission to clarity is what helps unlock speed in remote environments. So I
Yeah.
think in a remote first high growth company, you don't scale by adding more layers, and you
Yeah.
don't scale by throwing more people at the problem, right? And that's been one of my learnings, that you scale by distributing clarity. You embed context in your system, and then you trust people to do the right job faster than you can tell them how. I think that's the way to scale in a remote first high growth company. really not by making beautiful org charts, but really embedding the context, allowing people, trusting people to move fast, and distributing that clarity across your organizations.
Yeah, thanks. I think very, very well said, Sneha, and thanks for bringing. I think I'm sure the audience would benefit from what you just shared. I think it just reminds me of one of the recent conversation that I was having with a large hospitality chain, head of HR. I think they have this concept called, on the first point that you were mentioning, that delight budget. Like they're like the last man in the org is supposed to spend X dollars to delight the customer, right? So that's how you enable to, if you believe as a company that, hey, you want to delight customer, but where do you actually in the structure enable that, right? And it can't be at the top of the hierarchy, right?
Absolutely, Satish. Imagine the person who's interacting with the customer has to go through 50 approvals to be able to give something, $5, let's say. Then how do you move fast? How do you enable decision making? And how do you embed that in the culture of your organization?
Okay. Thanks, Neha. I think I'll HD on this part, right? When the teams are increasingly project-based and cross-functional, how do you ensure stability, right? Like, what becomes the backbone if not a fixed hierarchy? So, like, I think for example, there are challenges around when you move people. Let's say, take example of an engineering team. If you move them to different pods and it's not fixed, they may be there for 3 months, they may be there for 4 months, right? And people are rotating, managers change, right? Context change. Like, how do you ensure what's the backbone when it's not a fixed hierarchy on a
Yeah, $1 million question, Satish. But I'll maybe go back to the topic of the conversation, right, which is let the org chart burn. So that's maybe my extreme view, which is that stability is overrated. Org charts are slightly overrated as well. Let it burn. Let's not be afraid of chaos. If we have to deliver superlative outcomes as compared to peers in the market, then we got to maybe take risk like this to have superlative teams work together without necessarily some boundaries. That will lead to many cases some failures along the way. And I think that's the cost you pay to get that superlative outcome. That's the extreme view, and I'll tone it down now to make it more practical. I think not every part of the organization needs to be very loosely held as well. There are parts of the organization which are more SOP driven work, and they are more traditional forms of, maybe not traditional in the sense of a large organization, but more saner than do whatever you want would work for sure. But the growth team potentially would need a more loosely held structure again. But what do you do? Hopefully, what again worked for us. I think I liked what Sneha mentioned. I'll bank on that. I think trust, where you build, you over communicate, right? I think even if people are bored of hearing the same thing again and again, or what the team goal is, what the company goal is, how are we doing, when the function hierarchies are not filtering down that information, over communicate as a company is something that's worked for us. Build confidence with the people that you're doing the right thing and you're in the mix of it. You are a decision making party, not only recipient of outcomes. Eventually, as Neha mentioned rightly, I think trust is what will go for Satish.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'll Surya, I think very imaginative situation that I want to put you as a product engineering leader, right? If your next product is not a software, let's imagine that to be you know an organization built for scale, speed, and self-correction. With your engineering lens, right? How would you architect that org from scratch? What would be your equivalent of an MVP, system check, or load test that would apply to people in culture? Very, very hypothetical question.
Yeah.
Surya.
Thanks, Satish. Nice question. I would borrow what HD mentioned at the start of this conversation, right? Irrespective of whether it's a software product or something which isn't software. I think because we are discussing about org chart and teams, aligning teams to business outcomes should be the fundamental mantra that everybody should take out of this conversation, right? So whichever kinds of teams that we build, we first have to align it to the business outcomes. Second thing is, we have to set proper KPIs, right? And because some of the times I've seen that teams fail to set KPIs or they don't know how to actually measure it. And also we need to look for how do we actually do 1% continuous improvement week over week to improve the KPIs, because KPIs are there, they will not improve all by themselves. There will be a natural inertia that sets into the system and little bit of progress that keeps happening. But as leaders, as team members, how are we actually improving those KPIs on a week over week basis with little 1% continuous improvement? I think this has been timeless, irrespective of whether it's a software or a non-software thing. Aligning teams to business outcomes, setting KPIs, and improving it week over week 1% will definitely have, if I have to build or architect the org from scratch. And coming to how would it be equivalent to the MVP or system check, I think we should have, like how we build observability for the application, we should also have observability for the teams, in terms of we should do a continuous health check, look where the employees and the team members are engaged or not, and see where the bottlenecks are. So I think continuous observability framework within the teams will definitely help us build more agile organization.
Got it. Okay. Thanks, Surya. I think I'll come to the last part. I think I have a couple of few rapid fire questions for everybody on the panel, right? So first one is, one org structure trend you think is overhyped? I'll have Sneha probably answer this first. Yeah.
One is flat organizations. I think everybody thinks you make it flat, and the problems go away. But if it's not clear in terms of accountability, it doesn't work.
Sure. Okay, HD. Response.
Career path, Satish, where organizations are trying to build career paths for people, but I think people have their own view now, very strongly, which is not very traditional in that sense. So that's
all right. Surya.
Same, I'll go with Sneha. I think lean, flat hierarchy has been very, very overhyped for sure.
Okay. All right. One surprising benefit of letting org chart evolve organically. I'll start from Surya. I'll come back to us. Yeah.
So I think accountability definitely builds up when we let org charts evolve organically. Okay. We have seen at times natural leaders emerge when we loosen the grip. So I would say that's the surprising benefit.
All right, HD.
Yeah, similar point to Surya. People growth. I think people surprise us when you don't put them in a box.
All right, Sneha.
Likewise, I think you uncover leaders you would have never promoted, through the traditional path, because I think somebody was mentioning earlier. So I think you made that point that it's people who hold the status quo, who are non-controversial in a way, who typically get that growth. I think this allows people who would not fit the traditional definition of a leader to grow and emerge as leaders organically.
Okay. If org charts are too rigid, what should take their place? Skills, projects, relationships? Sneha?
I think outcomes. Outcome driven by what are the relationships who can get there? Who can get you there?
HD?
I can't top that, Satish. Outcomes followed by relationships. I agree.
Surya?
Agree with outcomes. I think we also need to look at skill graphs plus mission, because who you are and what you solve, both of these things should evolve together.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I think that's all I had from my side for questions. I'm assuming we may have some questions from the audience to take, but it's been lovely chatting with all of you. There is a sense of learning that I personally take. I'm sure there must be the same with the audience who've been part of the session. And audience, thanks for being a lovely audience. I think there probably Shambhavi will open up for questions, but I think what I take away personally is I think the future of org structures would look like more united by cost, not by hierarchy, autonomous, purpose-driven, structures, team builds around problems and goals and not functions. I think cross-functional collaboration for agility, innovation, etc., would become norms. I think organizations would look for high-performing, empowered teams. I think lean structures for speed and efficiency become a must to have from a structural point. I think that's how I summarize all that I learned from each of you. Thank you, and I'm back to Shambhavi.
Thanks so much, Satish, and thanks for the amazing summary as well. We've had a lot of questions in the QA. We've also had a lot of comments in the chat box. What we can do is, since there's a feature here where people can upvote questions, we can start with a couple of the highest voted questions, and then we can scroll through, and you all can also see if there are any other questions that you want to answer. So the first one is, how can dismantling traditional org charts actually boost agility, autonomy, and innovation in modern HR? I feel like the entire session sort of answered this, but if you want to give 2 quick points to sort of have a go at this.
So the way, Shambhavi, I'm reading this question is that we've spoken about organizations, we've spoken about teams, we didn't talk about HR. And I'm kind of taking this as a question that, it's being asked that what can you do within HR teams to, make them more agile, autonomous, and innovative, right? So I can maybe share an example where, of course, HR team follows a certain hierarchy. You've got your talent acquisition teams, you've got your L&D, COEs, HRBP, and so on. Is one of the things that I've always done in any of the teams that I've led is that outside of whatever are these responsibilities, every year we picked up like 5 top missions that as HR we need to go and solve for. Whether it's how do we hire faster to the market, how do we hire more diverse teams, how do we similarly, right? I mean, whatever is the problem that how do we become more efficient, or how do we increase our productivity, right? So some of those mission statements which are important for the organization, and then there have been squads which have gone and solved for that in terms of not necessarily going by the function that okay, L&D, you go and solve this, but really getting in people from within HR aligned to these missions and solving these problems. And that's allowed us to sort of move faster on each of these problem statements which have been important for HR and which have been important for the company. So Sudhi, I hope that answers your question in terms of how we've organized ourselves as squads to be able to more agile, be more innovative, be more autonomous than traditionally function in the boxes that our teams are usually put in.
Sure.
Maybe I can take a
Minute to add
go
on.
ahead.
I'll actually be. I'll give you a more like one step ahead of answer on Sneha. I think fully with her, and that's perfectly the way HR team should look at. What we have done is like all the top priorities we put in. We realized there is people function need to be just in 4 pods, so we converted the entire functional structure into talent, org effectiveness, people growth, and people experience in simple 4 areas, and which handles all the priorities. So irrespective of the functions that you belong to one of these pods.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Maybe I'll add one layer here is that from traditional org structure to, let's say, innovation within HR. Again, very highly spoken point, but difficult to implement as well, per se, is around how can HR quantify its impact for the business and how innovative you can be to not only obviously have faster lead times and highly engaged workforce and lower attrition and whatnot, but eventually take a leap from there to okay, how am I giving my business a step up in the market? If that will push teams, HR teams, to even question their existence in the first place and potentially deliver innovative outcomes.
Great. That was, I think, really helpful. Thank you so much. The next question is, what tools or software do you recommend for creating and managing organization charts efficiently?
Because I am from the product, definitely, there are multiple tools that are there in the market. If you haven't tried greytHR, I would definitely recommend you to start with the free trial or a freemium. The beauty about
So yeah,
that is,
this is too much. This is too much.
no. I'm just saying, you can drag and drop. You don't even. It's like very basic. If you want to change somebody's org structure, you can just drag and drop, and it just works, and you can try it out. I mean, others can suggest tools. Feel free.
Are there more questions, Shambhavi?
Yeah. So you can also have a look at the Q&A tab, but I'm just gonna show up a couple more on the stage. So there's one again on the role HR can play in coaching managers to lead without position power.
Lead by example, I would say. Do what you're preaching first, and hopefully people will follow.
Well, I think as HR, you're somehow not in the thick of the things, right? Like your manager is in that situation, right? Dealing with different stakeholders. So the vantage point that you have, right, is very different. You see the jungle. Sometimes managers get lost in the trees, right? So, you can bring in that lens in your conversations with managers, where you can guide them in terms of how to navigate sometimes to get things done, because your vantage point is very different than where an individual manager might be and what they might be struggling with. So I think that's the strength that HR brings to the table, while coaching managers, especially leading without positional power. Because these days it's also not about I'm a manager and I have my span of 6 or 7. The span of control doesn't work anymore, right? It's the span of influence, because most of the times you're getting things done through other teams, through other stakeholders, whether upwards, sideways, downwards, right? So it becomes very important as you as a partner to, one, have that trusted relationship, and second, have that understanding of the ecosystem to be able to guide and coach them for navigating.
Okay. I think there's one question about what fears or resistance might HR professionals face when traditional structures are dismantled.
Can I take a stab at that?
Yeah.
I think historically the mistake that HR makes is that we think that we'll bring the most beautiful structure and we'll tell everybody you've been organized and you've been restructured, which doesn't really work, right? Ultimately, it's not about here is your new structure, but it's about how do we work together to create a way of working which allows the company to be successful. So I think that piece about co-creating the structure, right? Defining, what are the outcomes that we're looking for. Going back to say what structure will help us get those outcomes really helps. So it's not about, here is a new structure, you've been restructured, but it's about, here is the new way in which we will win together, work together. And that's what we've tried in, and Satish, you might remember the mega category structure change that we did back in Flipkart days, right? It was completely co-created with business. So acceptance is also higher, and there's less defensiveness, and the outcome is much more comprehensive and much more, it's much more acceptable to business as well. And it does get into that iterative mode where something doesn't work, you go and you tweak that, and it's a work in progress. It's not here is your new structure, it's beautiful, we have the slides, and let's just run. So I think we need to change the way we think about it and the way we create it.
I think we can take one last question.
I think there is a question that I want to pick it up.
Great.
Why is HR, I know it's out of context, but I still want to pick this up. Why is HR not given prominence in startup environment? Sneha, you want to go first? I can add on to it.
Okay, so let me, I've been in those situations where, you start from a place where sometimes people don't even know what to expect from you. Right? I think in some ways, it can be discouraging, right? That, nobody's giving me value. But I think the way to look at it is that, here is my blank slate, and it's up to me to be able to create the role that I want to play. Right. And when you start approaching it from that standpoint, one, it's very empowering. And second, it gives you the space to be able to create your own role. Right. So to give you an example, one of my previous organizations, right, day one, I joined, and I'm coming from a very organization where HR were valued, strategic, seated at table, all of those things. Right. Day one, me and my team is asked to organize an offsite. And I'm looking at my manager at the time that okay, I thought we were going to do something strategic, right? But the point is, and I'm not saying don't execute, don't do any of these things, etc. All I'm saying is that you define what you do. And in the same organization, 1 year later, HR was at the table giving inputs for promotions, running the whole process, coaching the leaders, right? So it gives you a lot of autonomy to be able to do that. But you need to take it as an opportunity, than step back saying, look, nobody values me, and this is not a place for me.
Yeah, I think I'll summarize in a short way. I think it's about you need to earn the seat, and I think you can't come with a place of entitlement, and you work towards earning it. I think it is possible in all structure. I belong to a place today that there's an absolute freedom and absolute way that we drive the entire org decisions to all of that. I think today increasingly boards to everybody is really, really looking about what this function does and functional influence, having direct say in this area by the board directly. I think that's what I see. It's not just representing one company that I belong. I think I do see it across in the ecosystem. I think it's changing, but don't take it as an entitlement. Work towards earning it. I think you will definitely get that seat on the table. There's nobody who doesn't want it.
Absolutely, Satish. Very well summarized. And when you start solving problems, you become indispensable as well. So focus on solving problems, earning your seat. And
All right.
think
I think,
that's-
sorry, Sneha, to cut you. We are on time. I can see your bus on the screen. Thank you so much, all three of you, for wonderful insights. It was lovely chatting with all three of you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Satish,
everyone.
wonderful moderation, and thanks everyone. It was wonderful chatting with all.
The moderator is good when they literally cut you off in between your answer and stick to the time. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Satish, Sneha, HT, and Surya. We have a poll running, obviously, here. And thank you especially to greytHR, which is one of the sponsors of today's Shape of Work HR Playbook. So if anyone wants to do that, that is also there. We will move to the next session, which is very interesting in the sense that this is literally the first time I will see the winners of HR 40 under 40. Even I don't know. I am part of the team. And this is the first time I will get to know who has won the first ever HR 40 under 40. Shambhavi has been involved full time in it. The session must have already started. So I will request everyone to move on to that session, please. And see who are the top 40 HR professionals under the age of 40, the first ever HR 40 under 40 by the Shape of Work community. So yeah, please head over to that session. You can move to I will end the session in another minute or so, just ensuring that people have moved to the other session. You can just go to the main stage and join the 1 p.m. session there. And yeah, super excited to find out who the winners of HR 40 under 40 are in the next 45 minutes or so. We will get to know all of them. Cool. I will end the session now. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this session. Again, we are going to be announcing the HR 40 under 40 at a separate session. Just go back to the main stage and join the 1 p.m. session called HR 40 under 40. I am closing this session in 3, 2, 1.